Tara Calico was described as a bright young woman, focused and independent. She lived in the small town of Belen, 30 miles south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. At the time of her disappearance, she was a sophomore at the University of New Mexico, studying to become a psychiatrist. She had a high-grade point average and was a productive member of society, working at a local bank. She was also very active. She enjoyed playing tennis with her boyfriend, and she rode her bike daily. Her stepfather affectionately recalled her as a feisty little kid. Her life was full of potential, until tragedy struck one afternoon in September 1988. She mysteriously vanished during one of her customary bike rides. With few witnesses and traces, her case went cold for 25 years. Two reasons why she isn't presumed dead. Mainly, her body was never recovered, but also a year after her disappearance, an infamous Polaroid photo of two teenagers bound and gagged in the back of a cargo van fuels speculation that she might still be alive. September 20th, 1988 started out like any other Tuesday. Tara was going to ride her bike that morning. She had already laid out her clothes for a tennis match with her boyfriend afterwards at 12:30 p.m., and she prepared school books for classes later on at the University of New Mexico Valencia campus. Because it was a breezy, cool morning, she wore an orange sweater, which would also make her more visible, as if her mom's neon pink Huffy wasn't enough. She would have ridden her own bike, but it had a flat tire. She told her mom to come get her if she wasn't back by noon. And just like that, it would be the last time her mom ever saw her or heard her voice again. At 9:30 a.m., she left her home on Brugge Drive, seen in the picture above, and headed south for her daily bike ride. 2 hours later, Calico was last seen pedaling northbound on Highway 47 towards her home. On this stretch of the highway, seen in the picture, you can actually see the Rio communities from here, which was the neighborhood she lived in. Being only a few miles from home, and having ridden through these streets numerous times, she seemed to have been either deep in thought about the rest of the day or intensely focused on getting home, as she rode along, listening to her Sony Walkman. Unaware that a light-colored pickup truck had been following her, which witnesses had seen at various points throughout her route. This was the circumstance in which she was last seen. As the minutes approached and passed noontime, a cold front started to roll in from the north. At 12:05 p.m., Patty Noel, Calico's mom, left the house to find her. The blue sky Calico enjoyed during her bike ride grayed over as low clouds prevailed, perhaps foreshadowing a tragic realization, one which became imminent when no trace of Calico was found by her mother when she frantically searched her typical route. Patty contacted the hospital, rescue unit, and then the police to report her missing. Later that afternoon, a round of scattered thunderstorms came over Belen. I could only imagine the heartache, the helplessness of her mother as she waited by the phone, staring intently out the front windows, entranced by the gloom of rain, waiting for her daughter to appear, as if she returned from some misunderstanding. As the rumblings of the storm silenced, and the hours of twilight descended, the situation became very grave. 5 hours after Patty called police, her name was entered into the National Crime Information Center. Only a handful of clues were ever discovered, and there were only a handful of eyewitness reports. It would seem the entire community was up in arms. Over the next couple of weeks, intense search efforts were made to find her, but weather conditions complicated the searches and may have contaminated evidence. Areas surrounding the point of her disappearance on Highway 47 and her home were thoroughly analyzed, but neither her body or bike was found. Within 1 to 3 miles at the point of her disappearance, a cassette tape and the viewing window of Tara's Walkman were found. Nearby these clues, bike tracks were discovered indicating she ran her bike into the northbound soft shoulder of the highway, where an accident or struggle of some sort may have occurred. 19 miles east from the site, about 45 minutes away, Tara's Walkman was recovered near the John F. Kennedy campgrounds. Patty believes the clues were left behind by Tara in an attempt to mark her trail, but the clues may have been blown around by the storms the evening of her disappearance. Over the next few years, Patty worked relentlessly, spreading Tara's story in hopes of finding closure. The Valencia County Sheriff's Office and FBI worked alongside her. Patty was in thousands of interviews, and the story of her daughter's appearance became a nationwide story when it was featured on A Current Affair, America's Most Wanted, and Unsolved Mysteries. It was also profiled on 48 Hours and The Oprah Winfrey Show. Unfortunately, over time the calls stopped coming in, and the trail went cold. Tara's official status would remain missing endangered, meaning she wasn't presumed dead, but was missing in circumstances that indicate she's in danger. Patty believed that her daughter was still alive because of two things. Mainly, they never found her body, but also a Polaroid photo of two teenagers bound and gagged in the back of a van surfaced in Florida, which Patty was certain showed her daughter. We'll get to that later. This is what the truck following Tara may have looked like. It was a mid-1950s Ford F-100 pickup truck with a handmade or old manufactured camper over the bed. Witnesses described it as light-colored, possibly white or light gray, and dirty. It also had a custom red-colored Ford emblem. It's believed up to 4 boys who may have known Tara were inside. All efforts to locate the vehicle have failed. It's likely no longer intact. However, today trucks like this are considered classics and can fetch bids at auction upwards of $30,000. Likely it's gone, but there is good reason why it could still be around. If so, they might be able to trace the VIN and discover who owned it during Tara's disappearance. Finding it, though, may prove overwhelming, or at the very least it would be like finding a needle in a haystack if it existed at all. Even for the 1980s, a truck like this would have still been fairly unique. Belen is a small town, and someone should have recognized it. Since no one has come forward, this initially led me to believe it was likely from out of town. A year after Tara Calico disappeared, on June 15, 1989, this photo surfaced from a convenience store parking lot in Port St. Joe, Florida. A customer discovered the photo on the ground, in a parking space that was occupied by a windowless, late 1980s model Toyota cargo van. The photo is often associated with the Calico case, mostly due to the timing of its surfacing and Patty Dole's confidence the female is her daughter. Patty was presented with many photos of women that were suspected of being Tara, some of which were deceased, but she dismissed all but this one. Another photo surfaced, believed to be no older than 1990, of supposedly the same girl, which the Dole family still believed was Tara. Because of this photo, many think that Tara was abducted by traffickers and transported to Port St. Joe, Florida, where she was forced to work a number of jobs as a victim of sex trafficking. The photo shows the main victims of sex trafficking, women and children, and originates from Florida, which is considered one of the main hubs of trafficking in the country. Witnesses reported the van as a late 80s model, windowless Toyota cargo van, and the picture was taken in the cargo area. Who was the photo for? Why was it taken? The photo raises more questions than it answers, if any at all. And the more you probe for answers, the more your faith in humanity will be shaken. The Montecito, California photo. There is actually 2 other photos that Patty had second thoughts about, but she was most sure of the Polaroid. A blurry photo was recovered at a construction site in Montecito, California, and depicted a female with her mouth taped over. The same striped fabric seen on the pillow in the Polaroid was reportedly seen behind the female's head. The Amtrak train photo. Another picture surfaced, this one believed to be printed on film no older than February 1990, showing a female sitting next to a man on an Amtrak train, loosely bound by gauze, and her eyes also covered by gauze, concealed behind a pair of thick-framed glasses. The man sitting next to her was reportedly gesturing toward the camera. The Doles were most unsure about this photo, but it was entered into Calico's case file anyway, and the man was profiled among a list of suspects. Were the photos connected to Calico? The FBI was unable to positively identify the female or the little boy in the Polaroid, or any of the females seen in the other photos. Los Alamos National Laboratory also analyzed the photos and found no connection to Calico. To this day, the Polaroid is treated separately from the Calico case, and the California and Amtrak photos are cited as possible leads or clues for both investigations, where the cold case stood in 2010. The unofficial theory that Sheriff Rene Rivera, sheriff of Valencia County, shared in 2008 is that Tara was involved in some kind of traffic accident involving the truck that was seen following her and was taken away in an effort to cover up a possible vehicular manslaughter. Rivera said he even had suspects, but without a body could not make a case. John Doyle has accepted that his stepdaughter is most likely deceased, but still hopes to have closure. Patty was swept into a whirlwind of chaos and did her best to make the most of things, but ultimately would not live to see her daughter's case solved. Patty passed away in 2006. In 2013, a task force was assembled and assigned to specifically solve the case. They interviewed multiple witnesses that have come forward. They all have one thing in common, and that's the belief Tara Calico never left New Mexico. They also believe she was the victim of a violent abduction, murder, and that there was a cover-up involving Sheriff Rene Rivera and former Sheriff and Commissioner Lawrence Romero Sr. of Valencia County. Something to keep in mind was the last time Calico was seen. It was on the last leg of her daily bike ride, traveling north on Highway 47, about 3 to 4 miles out from the Rio communities, when a light-colored, mid-1950s Ford F-100 was seen following her. That being said, the following information was compiled from multiple supplement reports released to the public by the 2013 Cold Case Task Force and is considered merely hearsay or speculation discussed in witness interviews. Donald Dutcher had a presence among Tara Calico's class in high school, particularly among the group of boys suspected in her disappearance. Back in the day, 28 years ago, he'd park his car at his friend's laundromat and eventually attract a crowd of neighborhood kids. That's how he became acquainted with a number of the locals and learned a little bit about everyone. Tara Calico was described by witnesses as an intelligent, athletic, and attractive young girl throughout high school. Donald elaborated, she wasn't the party type. She was more interested in staying focused on schoolwork and her various responsibilities. John Doyle, her stepfather, said she had always been focused and self-sufficient as a child. Dutcher knew one of the boys suspected of being in the truck. Charles Houghton was a known drug user among his friends and locals of Belen. Throughout high school, he was constantly skipping school and smoked weed with friends. His drug addiction eventually led to heroin later on in adulthood. Houghton confessed to Dutcher, claiming he couldn't live with the guilt. Unfortunately, it was around this time that Dutcher spent some time in jail in another state and was unable to forward this information. Agents from the task force questioned him on other people that may have been suspects, and from what I was able to verify, it seems Donald's memory of the events and the information seem reliable. Of all the witnesses interviewed, I was the most impressed by his statement. Dutcher mentioned another boy who seemed to be the main person of interest, Lawrence Romero Jr., but didn't quite know him as well as Houghton. Henry Brown, an older gentleman at the time, lived up the street from Romero. He was associated with the boys and the overall scene in a number of ways, one being he was a worker at the high school they attended, and he also relied on Romero for his drug fix. According to Brown, Romero lived in a trailer on his father's rental property. He had built a makeshift basement underneath his trailer, and that's where he partied with friends and sold drugs. Sometime after Calico had disappeared, Brown went to visit Romero, who was partying with friends, and saw a grave wrapped in a blue tarp in the basement. That's when Romero and his friends began to open up about the case. Allegedly, Romero was driving an older model truck at the time, the 1950s F-100 as seen by witnesses. Apparently, everyone knew that Calico rode her bike through town and down the highway and major streets. it was easy for them to track her down. Romero then hit her with the truck and threw her in the bed along with the bike. The discussions became graphic when one of the boys claimed to have raped her inside the camper. Brown then claimed the boys took her out to the gravel pits, where they continued to rape and sodomized her in seclusion. She got ballsy. Romero said among his friends, describing a moment when Calico stood up to defend herself and threatened to have them thrown in jail. That's when a couple of boys held her down, and Romero stabbed her to death, and they discarded the body in nearby bushes. The motivation behind all this was believed to be a malicious and violent act of jealousy. There may have been some kind of violent feud between Romero's gang and Calico boyfriend at the time, Jeff Abeda. When the search began, they got nervous and moved the body beneath the trailer, and that's when Brown saw it. The boys threatened his life. "If you ever saying anything, we'll come for you next." Brown has only come forward with this information now due to failing health, and he wanted to pass it on before he died. Tara's body was moved again to its final resting place, supposedly buried inside Valencia County somewhere. The bike was said to be discarded at a junkyard. It's theorized that Romero was never brought to justice because his father, Lawrence Romero Sr., was the chief of police at the time. Several of the witnesses believe that there was a cover-up. Brown also had choice words for Sheriff Rene Rivera, who was a deputy in 1988, that he believed helped cover up Calico's murder. "Your sheriff there is not innocent." Months after making his statement to police, Brown passed away. A surprising amount of deaths and misfortune seems to plague the group of people involved with her disappearance. Of the 4 boys suspected of her abduction and murder, only one is believed to be alive today. One of the unnamed suspects, in some poetic justice, was supposedly hit by a truck and killed. I was not able to verify his death, but I've read this from multiple witness reports. Former Sheriff and Commissioner Lawrence Romero Sr., considered by witnesses to play an influential role in the cover-up of Calico's murder, suffered the loss of 2 children since then. Romero Jr. was cited by various witnesses and was believed to be the boy that struck Tara with a vehicle, abducted and murdered her, then buried the body somewhere in Valencia County. To get an idea of what a lunatic he was, I was able to verify that in 1991 he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, playing an actual game of Russian roulette. Romero Sr. then lost a daughter in 2013. Charles Houghton made a chilling confession to Donald Dutcher, saying that he was constantly haunted by her voice. According to Dutcher, Houghton took the easy way out. I wasn't able to uncover any details about his apparent suicide, but I believe it was drug-related. Houghton's death was indeed verified by an obituary from 2008. As for Sheriff Rene Rivera, he ended up losing his position as chief in 2010 and has long been criticized by locals for being corrupt and perpetuating the crime that's plagued Belen. A simple Google search will reveal a rabbit hole of complaints and discussion related to Rivera. Mystery still surrounds the case. The task force ended their investigation in 2014 and won't be reopening it unless a confession is made or a body is discovered. Tara is still missing.
Follow our channel to explore more unsolved mysteries and true crime stories.